Hi, everyone, and welcome to the free Assange Vigil. I'm Taylor Hudak, and I'm joined by my co-hosts Andrew Smith and Steve Poikonen. Now, today marks 41 days until the start of the second round of Julian Assange's extradition hearings. And today is day 3,409, the start of his illegal and arbitrary detention, 361 days since his arrest outside of the Ecuadorian embassy in London, 27 days since Chelsea Manning was released from federal custody, and 1,039 days since Reality Winner was taken into federal custody. This evening, we are joined by two very special guests, and we're very pleased to have them on. We are joined by Billy Winner, the mother of Reality Winner, and Brittany Winner, Reality Winner's sister. So I want to thank you guys both so much for coming on. Just give us an update about how she's doing and just how she is right now, being the fact that we are in a global pandemic and crisis.
Well, I can definitely speak to how she is right now as of, the 10 minutes ago that I spoke to her on a video chat. As much as a lot of us feel like we're prisoners in our own homes right now, either we're working from home or we're self-quarantining, self-isolating, imagine that times 10,000, where you can't even go outside, because that's what reality's facing right now. She doesn't have any recreation time. She's essentially locked in her room with her bunkmates. She told me today if they had cells, traditional cells with bars on them, then they would be locked in their cells. And so things are not going well for her, as would be expected. And she's the kind of person who really values her outside time, her exercise time. And so just it's taking a toll on her mentally, emotionally, physically. And so as much as we're all suffering on the outside, she's really feeling a lot of panic and a lot of like she's out of control. She doesn't have any control of her situation. She can't isolate herself from the other inmates like she would be able to on the outside, for example. I believe they just received some masks yesterday. She wasn't wearing one on the video chat, so I don't think it's compulsory that they wear one. But I'm sure she feels like maybe it's futile at this point to even try to avoid getting infected, because any of the people in there could get infected, and then it's just going to spread like wildfire over the prison. And so she feels like a sitting duck, like it's just a matter of time. And the hopelessness, I think, that we all feel is being magnified in her by 10,000 at this point.
Could you talk for a little bit, Billy, about like who Reality Winner is and kind of what led up to her release of documents and whistleblowing?
Well, Reality is a 28-year-old American girl. She was born and raised in South Texas. And right out of high school, she decided that she wanted to join the Air Force. She wanted to be a linguist. One of her older stepbrothers is a linguist for the Air Force, and she was following in his footsteps. But she wanted to be, a Middle Eastern linguist. I think that at the beginning, she felt like she could do some good and she could, help. And so she really wanted, when she joined the Air Force, I know that she had dreams of being deployed, because she wanted to go across and she wanted to actually help there in the Middle East. That never happened for her. So she was never really satisfied with her career there with the Air Force. She was an analyst. She was a linguist. She was given a commendation medal because she was one of their best analysts that they had. But the Air Force wasn't, something that she wanted to do any further. So after her 6 years, she departed from the Air Force. She was, given an honorable discharge with the commendation medal. And she was looking for a way to basically deploy, to go across to help, to be more a part of the efforts over there. And so that's why she took the job with the contract services, as she saw that as a stepping stone. and it landed her at the NSA there in Georgia. I know that, she was devastated with what she was hearing on the news, and the fact that, our elections didn't seem to be, quite on the up and up, I would say. It just didn't seem, that we were getting the full information. I know that she was angry with the lies that were already being told by this administration early on when, Trump took office. And here she had a document right in front of her that was basically something that she felt that the world needed to see, that the American people needed to see.
And can you remember, because we had Mr. McBride on, he's a whistleblower from Australia that talked about his situation and what he had revealed. Could you talk a little bit about when you kind of first found out that they had detained Reality?
Well, Reality called us that evening on June 3rd, 2017. She called my husband, her stepdad, and basically it was an FBI agent that made the initial call, said basically that we have your daughter here and she wants to talk to you. Reality told her stepdad that she was being taken into custody. She didn't know what would happen from there. Later on that evening, she called us when she had been booked into the county jail, and she asked us to, to travel up there to Georgia to, take care of her home, take care of her pets at that time. And, I guess we were all thinking that, this would be something that would be easily resolved, that she would at least get out on bail or bond. That Monday following her arrest, we went to the initial hearing, and that was just where they read the complaint against her. And it was a complaint against her. It was very vague. They were indicating that she was being charged with mishandling of classified documents, or mishandling classified information. But nobody was really telling us what had happened. And of course, Reality couldn't tell us what had happened. Reality couldn't tell us what she was being accused of. She couldn't tell us what the charges actually were, because all of our conversations with her were being recorded, and she knew that, and she knew that they would be used against her. And so we really didn't have an understanding until later that evening, when we were contacted by reporters, and basically I had to ask them what was going on. And that's when they shared the link with me, and they shared the press release that the government had done. And that's when we knew what she was basically being charged with, and the document that she had released.
Brittany, do you want to weigh in on when you first found out and what was going through your mind as well?
So I was actually on a date that night, and I got a bunch of weird calls from a number. And when somebody calls you 12 times, you should probably pick up the phone at some point. But I had been getting a lot of spam calls, and I was like, man, this spammer is really persistent. And then of course, when I found out later from Mom and my stepdad Gary that Reality had been arrested, I felt really bad, because I know that she was trying to call me. She was trying to tell me what was going on and everything. And so I felt like I had failed her, just because I was very stringently not picking up calls from strange numbers. And so now to this day, even if I think it's spam, I'm always picking up the phone. So I was in the same boat as Mom, as not knowing what could possibly be going on. It never occurred to me that she would be accused of leaking a document, or that this would all happen. It was just kind of a shock, I think, to all of us, and to me as well. I mean, I know my sister very well, and it never occurred to me that anything like this would ever happen to us, because we're a normal family. We're just average. We're a small family. We're from South Texas, of all places. And we don't get into trouble. That's really not who we are. And so I think that for my sister to suddenly be in pretty substantial trouble was a big shock to all of us, especially me.
Could you guys talk for a little bit about just the situation surrounding her court case? Because to my knowledge, it's fallen under that jurisdiction of like classified information. There's not very much press-wise that gets released in regards to her. Could you kind of talk about like the media blackout, but also the legal blackout, so to speak, about the information that actually gets to get released about her situation?
Yeah, so that was super difficult for us to understand what was going on and to try to, I guess, understand and plan and see what was going on. Like I had said, we were positive that Reality would be granted bond or bail, just like everyone else. I mean, she has no prior criminal history. Here she is, somebody who served her country for 6 years. She's, she also had another job that she could rely on. There was no reason whatsoever why she, of all people, would be denied bail. But they found a way to paint her as somebody who actually, was a threat to America, was a threat to our safety, somebody who would at any moment would go out and join the Taliban, is how they portrayed her in the court. And so she was denied bail. And then there was, yes, this whole secrecy. There were huge gaps in the information that was available even to us and to her attorneys at first, because everything was under that veil of classified documents, because it was classified. So all of her attorney team, when the attorney team came on, everyone had to then be vetted and they had to be given top security clearance. And along with that, came a huge thing as far as this gag order. They were not permitted to be out there in the media because of their security clearance, which I didn't understand at first. Also, the judge reprimanded her very first attorney for going out there and speaking to media. And, there was pretty much a blanket gag order put on the case by the judge in the beginning. And then because of their security clearance, the attorneys were gagged, because when you do have that top security clearance, you can't go out and talk about anything that you're working on. The government makes sure of that. And then there was this other component as far as like media just not being interested anymore in Reality's story. A part of it had to do with, our day-to-day thing here in the United States, where every single day is chaotic as far as our news cycle goes. What's a big story today gets buried tomorrow because another bigger, even more chaotic story comes in. And so Reality really didn't stand a chance under any of those circumstances, to get the coverage that she needed for her name and her story to be out there. And then I think that the government did such a good job at the very beginning of painting her as someone who was a threat to her country and who wanted to do her country harm and who was going to, join the Taliban. And once you hear that about, a young American, nobody wants to support that person. And so it was very hard for us to get media to tell her story, to continue to follow the court case and things like that. The court cases were very difficult for media to follow because they weren't allowed, cameras weren't allowed in. And again, her attorneys weren't allowed to talk about her case. They weren't allowed to talk about any information about her case or anything surrounding her case at all. Everything became off limits for them. And so it was really up to, the family and a few supporters to try to rally support, to try to rally, as much media attention as we could. But it just never seems to be enough, not in today's world, what we're living with today.
We saw a lot of the same parallels in Chelsea Manning's case and John Kiriaku's case and in Julian's case, where they literally hide the evidence, so to speak, where they don't the way John Kiriakou explained it is that courts that handle national security information are more interested in acting like public relations firms and almost like a crisis management team to stop the information from reaching the public. Do you guys feel that that's something that happened in her case as well, that it was less about justice and less about what she revealed and more about um, basically like mitigating damage and embarrassment for the government itself?
Yes, absolutely. In the end, and especially now looking back at it, her whole plea deal, the U.S. attorney even said that, I mean, he was saying the reason why they gave her this sentence that they gave her and didn't want to go to court was to protect information from coming out. And that's why they offered this plea deal. The government was going after her for the full 10 years, and they made it clear from the onset that they wanted to go for the 10 years. And they made it very difficult for her team to even defend her. Her team had to basically travel to Washington, D.C. to view, some of the documents and the evidence in a super secret skiff in Washington, D.C. So they made it very, very difficult. And then they would do these humongous data drops, or what they told me is they would just dump massive documents and a massive amount of data into the case all at once. And so her team would have to travel to Washington, D.C., would have to spend countless hours sifting through, things that, maybe a text message that she sent, to somebody, and wondering, is this what they're going to use, or are they not going to use it? They're just... And then, the court ruled against Reality at every single turn, which we saw it was very, very biased against her. And they were definitely trying to do, like what you said, they were trying to do damage control. They were just trying to make this thing go away. They were trying to make sure that she received, an adequate sentence to set an example for anyone else who might think about doing this. And they didn't want anything more to come out. And they definitely did not want for her case to be big in the media. They didn't want for people to start asking questions, for people to start really looking at who she was and what she had leaked. What they had told me was, even if they had gone through with a trial on, for her on this, the jury would never, ever have actually known what document Reality Winner leaked, because they would have hidden that away as classified. That was top secret. That was not something that a jury would even have been able to see. And so what kind of a criminal case, what kind of a jury trial can you have if the actual jury doesn't get to see the key piece of evidence in your case, but then the government gets to say that she did grave harm to national security, and they never have to back it up. You don't stand a chance in these cases at all. And that's where, their hands were tied. And of course, we know that the government has unlimited resources. They have unlimited money. They have unlimited, attorneys. They don't care how long this plays out. They don't care how many trips to Washington, D.C. her team has to make. They don't care how much of a bill is being added up. And they didn't care that my daughter was being stuck in a substandard county jail for that entire year and a half. That just, weighed in their favor. And so that's how our government plays in these cases. It's totally... It's an unfair system. It's lopsided. It's not justice at all.
And we've seen.
Brittany, go ahead, Steve. Sorry.
We've seen historically how whistleblowers are treated, both by the government and the mainstream press. Have you been able to find more independent outlets that you can take your message to and your story to? Do you find that you've been able to communicate with some journalists, or is it basically an entire media blackout? This is for either of you, by the way.
No, we've had we've had very good rapport with I wouldn't say mainstream, but some reporters, and like Shadowproof has done tremendous work and following her case from the very beginning. And then The Guardian has also done some good work. CNN has done some stories on her, and they have been sympathetic, and they've been fair. And then we've had some independent journalists, like Carrie Howley did the big article for the New York Magazine, which really did, it opened up a lot of windows and a lot of pathways for reality story to get out there. Because of Carrie Howley's story, there was a play that was actually developed. A producer saw, the article, started doing some research, found the transcript and said, this is a play, and did a play based on Reality's interrogation by the FBI. And we now also have, like a major film producer looking at doing a feature film. We've got, books that are being written, chapters devoted to reality and things like that. With regard to like the mainstream, I guess I'm not even sure who that is anymore in our country. And because there's just, we've kind of opened up and split things. And so, but we have had some good success and rapport with some reporters and journalists.
Could you talk for a little bit, Brittany, about just like growing up with her and maybe some of your like fond memories that you have from before all of this happened for the last 1,000 days now?
Sure. So Reality and I are 15 months apart. I'm older. And basically my whole life, she's been there, right, as my little sister. She's extremely smart, and so we kind of competed in school, and she's kind of the more athletic one. I was in band, I could barely manage marching band, but I played musical instruments. She learned languages. I was kind of more into like literature and English. She was learning Latin in high school, so we were very similar but also very distinct. We also have very distinct personalities. I think I'm kind of a little bit more easygoing, and she's very intense with her convictions and just the way that her mannerisms, just the way that she is. She's very intense. I went to college. I mean, like a lot of people out of high school do, and she went to the Air Force, so there's kind of a divergence there. I feel like when sisters are teenagers, they kind of clash a little bit. There's a little bit of like either sibling rivalry, or you can't stand anybody, and the person closest to you definitely can't stand them. So, but after I left for college, we had a really, really deep relationship, mostly over text messages, for example, or just sending each other pictures or memes. And I felt like she was the person that I was the closest to in this world, and I know she felt the same way. Especially when I moved on to grad school, and around that time was when she was in Georgia, working as a contractor, and we talked daily via Facebook Messenger, sending each other silly things, but also talking about very serious things. When our dad was sick, or when his health was failing, he ended up passing away in December of 2016. And so I know that hit her really hard as well. And so I was there for her to talk about that, to get through that. But we talked about basically everything under the moon. We talked about personal things. We talked about interesting things on the news. She would mention things that were going on, that were in the news that affected the intelligence community, or I would ask her about things that were going on and get her opinion as somebody who works in that sphere. And so we talked about current events a lot as well. And one of the things that was really horrifying that came out during one of her pretrial bail hearings was I was actually called to the stand to talk about some of the Facebook Messenger conversations that I had with my sister, and essentially try to defend what were private messages between us, that were viewed as unfavorable by the prosecution. For example, her joking, and she's a very sarcastic person. She had to take a polygraph for her new job as a contractor, and she was joking that she says that she hates America all the time. And the thing about my sister is she likes to pass off sarcasm as not being sarcastic, because that's part of the joke for her. And so when I asked her, you don't really hate America, right? And she goes, I mean, I do, but I know that she didn't really mean that, right? And so I was called upon, in court to answer for what were very private conversations, and to try to explain to people who have never met my sister, the prosecution, who don't know her sense of humor, don't know how we talk, to explain these things. And one of the things that I found really hard was the idea that this could also happen to anyone. I mean, I never thought that these private conversations would be seen by people, would be held against her. And I think that we are so vulnerable. We're so much more vulnerable than we think we are to the government coming in and taking things way out of context. And who hasn't said, a joke or something, to their sister, to their close confidant, that if, for example, a prosecutor decided that they were going to use that to nail you against the wall. I mean, I think everybody has. And that was astounding and shocking. And it was something that I felt like was a huge breach of my privacy as well. And it was awful. And so I feel like ever since, obviously, she's been in jail, in prison, in custody, we haven't had a conversation that hasn't been listened to. And so just the breach of privacy continues. And it's really, it's hard to have a relationship with someone, to the caliber that we used to have, knowing now that everything is listened to and every conversation could be used against her. And, it's just really hard to feel like, I'm really talking to my sister, that I can have that relationship. And right now I can't, because that's how it is. And that's really messed up, the surveillance and everything that happened, both during her pretrial bail hearing and then now. And so I think that things have really changed between us, because we can't talk like human beings, like sisters. And I worry about how things are going to be, when she gets out, or if she's ever going to be able to trust, or, I find myself watching what I say at all times. There's the joke, where you're on, your computer or something, and you assume that somebody's listening to you, or there are people who are really paranoid about that. And I feel like I'm one of them now, that we are being surveilled to a certain extent. And it feels wrong, and it feels invasive. And before all of this happened, I had no idea.
Yeah, actually, in one of the most recent national security threat reports, they put hacktivists, leaktivists, and public disclosure organizations in the same category of Al Qaeda and ISIS. So it really just shows how there's this large war going on against truthful information and public disclosures of what our government's doing with our money in our name. And they just want to really try as hard as they can to keep as many people in the dark as possible. And so I'm really thankful for people like Reality Winner and Chelsea Manning and Julian Assange and Jeremy Hammond for stepping forward and putting themselves in these situations where they inherently know the risks that they're going to put themselves in, but they do it for the fact that they love this country and they think people deserve to know what's going on. Do you guys think that there was a sense of that with Reality, that she essentially loved this place and this time enough to put herself in a situation where she could show and shine a little bit of light on what was going on in the larger scheme of the world, essentially?
I mean, I do, we've never had a conversation about it, because we've never been in a situation where we can talk freely about it. And I don't know if we ever will be, like Brittany says. But, one of the clues is in the play, and in the FBI interrogation in the transcript, where Reality says, you know, why do I have this job if I can't do anything about this? You know, what am I doing here? She felt very torn, and here that document was sitting there for numerous people to see. It was out there for anyone who worked in intelligence to see. And, you know, she said, why can't this be out there? So that's, you know, that's the clue that we have, you know, is in her very first discussion with the FBI about it, and her admission on why she did this, or that she did this.
Yeah, and just to add to that, for a lot of people, I think that the idea would come to them that, hey, you know, I'm hearing this in the news. I'm hearing that Russia being involved in attempting to change the results of our elections, or the attempt to interfere in our presidential election. You're seeing it on the news that that's fake, that's a hoax, and then she is seeing a bona fide document in front of her that is providing evidence to the contrary. And I think that a lot of us would probably wonder what to do with that information. Many of us would be too afraid to do anything. But I think that reality felt like she had to. Because again, like who else was going to step up and do it? I mean, it hadn't happened since. She really felt at that moment that she could make a difference in the national conversation about whether or not there, you know, was a concerted effort by the Russians to interfere in our elections. And so I think she thought at that moment that she had the opportunity to set the record straight, that she had the power and the duty or obligation as an American citizen, somebody who loves their country, to tell the American people the truth. And I don't know what she thought was going to happen, if they were going to trace it back to her or anything like that. Like Mom said, we've never actually had a conversation about most of this, like her motivations. But just knowing my sister and knowing her thought process for a lot of this, she felt like the citizens of America needed to know that there was influence or attempted influence and interference in the elections, and that she had the power, the ability, the opportunity to get that out there. And that's what she chose to do.
And that's never an easy choice. I've never been put in a situation to have to make a decision like that. So the people that have put information forward have some of my deepest admiration, because it's one of the things that we can't properly address the issues in the world unless we have the actual information to have discussions around them. So I would like to really thank both of you guys for coming on, and I was just wondering if both of you guys could leave some final thoughts, but also where people can find you if they're interested in finding you.
Okay. I'm grateful
And
for
before you
anyone.
guys do that too, if you guys could also let us know as you close out, just one thing that you want people to know about Reality Winner that they do not know. And thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it.
All right, thank you. As I was saying, I am always so very, very grateful for anyone who will tell her story, will get her story out there, will say her name. As you've seen, myself, and there's a small group of us that has been very active on social media from the beginning, and we don't intend to stop until she's free and justice is done. You know, what happened to Reality could happen to anyone, as far as the government, you know, using their full force against you. And what I really want people to know is the way that the government acted in her case was unjust. It was wrong. You know, they're taking information about my daughter's life and twisting it in a way and lodging it against her. You know, they used everything that was good about who she was, and they twisted it into something bad and weaponized it against her to make her look like something that she wasn't. And that, to me, I will never forgive my government for that. And I do also, I believe that the reason why Reality is serving the longest prison sentence for anyone in her situation for this crime so far is because of the information that she shared, that our government didn't want that piece of information out. So you can find us at standwithreality.org. That website has basically everything that you need to know about how to get involved, how to follow us on Twitter, how to follow us on Facebook, things to do if you want to help, how to write to Reality, and a lot of the articles and news reports that have been published about her. So I thank you very much.
The one thing I would like people to know about Reality is that she's never going to stop loving her country. And even when she gets out, whenever that is, hopefully it's early, as we've been fighting for, she's going to still do everything that she can for her planet, for her country, and in service to other human beings. And so as much as this experience has, crushed her in mind, body, and soul, I know that she's going to come out of it still loving her country, still being proud to be an American, and still fighting for things that she believes are right. And I look forward to seeing what that kind of activism is going to be. And the world will not stop hearing about her even when she's out. So I look forward to the wonderful things that she does when she's on the outside. And I encourage people to visit our website, like Mom talked about. Follow us on Twitter, use the hashtag #RealityWinner or hashtag #FreeRealityWinner, and keep us in your thoughts and prayers as we go through this with Reality, and try to keep her spirits up until that day that we can get her back.
Thank you both so much for coming on.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And the rest of you guys watching, stick with us because we have lots of news to go over this evening. And I think we're going to start with the case management hearing that Julian Assange was scheduled for earlier today. If you guys remember, the last hearing, it was brought up as to whether or not the names of Julian Assange's partner and his children should be released to the media so they can then go forth and make hay with that. There were 5 total reporters in the courtroom today. We know 2 of them. And so this morning, Tarek Haddad, who was present in the courtroom, came on to my show, Slow News Day, and gave us an update. Are we going to go ahead and roll clip, or are we going to kind of go? Okay. Then roll clip. Pretty dry, but one of the key points that was addressed today was whether or not Julian's partner and the names of his children would be released. And it seems like a regular human being with a organic heart, not one made out of metal and the ground up bones of children, would want to protect the names of Julian's partner and children. What happened with that?
Well, so this has kind of been an ongoing thing where we've been discussing it back and forth for a little while. It's actually one of those cases where I kind of probably tend to disagree with most Assange supporters. And that might make me a little bit unpopular, but I think, that's my opinion. So it was kind of started off when we had the discussions about whether Julian should be granted bail, with kind of in light of this whole COVID outbreak. His partner had given a statement to say that, she's been in the UK for 20 years with their 2 children. Well, not for 20 years with the children, but she's been in the UK. She has a house in the UK, and her statement was to the effect that if Julian was given bail, he would have a firm address in the UK, and his family ties are here. His children are here. It was kind of one of those statements just to show that, you know, he's going to stay in the UK. He's not at risk of flight. Understandably, she's tried to seek quite a sheltered life away from the press, and try to keep her children away from the press, which I don't blame her at all, and I completely understand that. Julian's defense lawyers made an application to have her anonymity protected. And the reason why I probably would disagree with, well, I'm still on the fence, but the reason that I can see the argument why it should be named is that historically in British courts, for someone's anonymity to be granted, there needs to be proof that they are at harm if they're going to be named in the court proceedings. As far as I'm aware, then, you know, there might have been harassment before, or there's the potential of harassment in the future if she's named. But that's kind of no different than anyone else being named in a newspaper. So I think it's one of those fine balances of, you know, you need to demonstrate that there is harm caused, or that, you know, that they are, you know, significant risk of being harmed, you know, in a different way than any other person being named by the press. Because, you know, we have this principle of open justice. You know, you can't kind of give evidence from someone if they're not named, if you can't verify it, if you can't kind of back it up. But so.
I wanted Tarek to finish giving the update, so I didn't jump in here real quick, but I want to ask you guys what you think about that, because I personally don't believe that his kids' names should be disclosed to the press, or his partner's name should be disclosed to the press, but that's probably because I have like an emotional attachment to it. From a journalistic standpoint, I think the case that he's making is very by the book. But what do you guys think? Do you think that it's in the public's interest to know these names? Do you think that they are? Because I personally think Tarek was naive when he thought that they may have been harassed or may be harassed in the future, but he wasn't sure.
So as far, I guess, traditionally, because that was a statement that was made by his partner that was submitted to the court, historically, that is like that's on the public record. So typically those are documents that would be public. So that's why we're even having to have this conversation to begin with. I think that it's very, very clear that they are at a very high risk if their names were to be disclosed, and they should not be disclosed. And the judge, I can't imagine that she does not realize, of course, that there is a great threat to their safety and security if their names are released. So I don't think they should be at all. But the reason why we're having to talk about this, like I said, is because historically, that document would be a public record. But Steve, you make the great point in that stream as well, where you bring up the issue of, can minors' names be mentioned? Because in the US, they cannot. I'm not sure what it's like in the UK. But I don't think it's in the public interest either to have this information. There's nothing to be gained from having this information.
And I agree with a lot of that you said, Taylor. I'm a bit of an absolutist when it comes to free speech, but at the same time, I don't think that it's necessarily even completely relevant, and it feels more like an intimidation tactic or a negotiating trick or some other nefarious act by the court to say, well, hey, if you keep pushing all of this, then we're going to release these names of these people and put them at risk too. So I think it's something that, whether it should or shouldn't be released, is more irrelevant in my opinion. And it really comes down to the fact that the court's trying to use this as almost like a game of power, where they're saying, hey, we have the power to put these names out there and have your family be harassed, because I don't think it is necessarily in the public's interest or even in the court's business to release these names. But it's because the first time that this came up, I believe it was during the bail hearing, where a lot of that conversation about the bail circled back to, well, what about these names? And it felt almost like if you keep trying to push this, if you keep trying to get free, we're going to release this information about your loved ones and the people in your lives that could cause serious harm to them. So that's kind of my take on it. There is, it's more about showing that they have the ability to put these names out there for these people to get harassed than to protect them. Yeah, you can go ahead and jump back in.
So there's kind of two different aspects to it. There's the anonymity aspect to it, and then there's the reporting restrictions. So at the moment, there is no anonymity for her, but she hasn't been named in the court proceedings. But if she was to be, or there is no anonymity protection, so she can be openly named. Anyone could talk about it. But right now, there is a reporting restriction under the UK's contempt of court legislation. So if you report when you're not supposed to, you'd be held in contempt of court. So that's currently in place, and that's going to be in place until the 24th of February. Because the judge has declined to give her that protection. Julian's lawyers feel like she deserves that protection. They have their reasons, their arguments, which they could be valid. Because those arguments haven't been given. They are appealing that to the High Court, the Supreme Court. So, sorry about that. So they have to make that application to the High Court before the 24th, to the Supreme Court, I should say, and that gives. And then we have to wait for the decision of the Supreme Court whether her anonymity or not should be protected, or better to say whether the reporting restrictions are there or not. She can be in court.
But in the interim time, it is legal for them to publicly print her name, or reporters to publicly. Okay. So it's like an injunction. They can't report it until the High Court or the Supreme Court makes a determination one way or another.
Yeah. Well, at the moment, it's pretty much that. But it's kind of like she can't be named until the 24th, which is enough time for the application for that to be made. If they if they kind of forget, if they drop the ball to make the application, or for some reason they change their mind, that'll just automatically drop away. And then she can be named. So if you do name her, and then I guess this is a warning to everyone, if you do name her, if you do know what her name is or the children's names, you could be held in contempt of court, which carries I believe a £5,000 fine and a 5-year prison sentence, something along those lines. Just to warn the activists out there.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, I personally, I don't know of anybody who's on, like, I suppose our side of the fence of this activism that would want to publicly name Julian's partner or children. At least here in the States, you can't print the name of a minor child without consent of the parent or guardian. I would hope that applies universally, but I'm not sure.
It kind of depends. If there's a newsworthy reason to print the name, there might be. And the judge kind of gave a bit of guidance today, which she said, regardless if that decision is given to allow you to print the names, we would kind of request that you would make your own judgments as to whether it's actually in the public interest, and whether it's newsworthy. So then it will be kind of down to the individual publication to do so. Either way, at this stage in the proceedings, we haven't actually heard the names of the children or the partner. We don't know why they're seeking protection other than some sort of harassment, but we've not really gone into those details. I imagine those details will be made within the actual application to the Supreme Court.
All right. Um, any other points to touch on that happened during the hearing today? I know that they discussed the possibility of whether or not to even move forward with the hearing on the 18th.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was kind of one of the main points of today. Again, I think a clear demonstration of what's going on. But yeah, we had the defense team arguing why they're just not capable of being prepared. You know, at the moment they're not able to see Julian at all. There's no visitation, a lot of visitation times in Belmarsh. It's very difficult. Even the video service is not available. You know, there's all these reasons that they're just not able to prepare all of the material and everything that's needed for this case. And despite that, the judge said we're still going to go ahead on the 18th of May. Interesting to that point. Even so, there is a psychiatrist for the U.S. prosecution who has to go to Assange to submit evidence for the prosecution side, and he's not been able to do that, and the prosecution haven't been able to submit evidence that they need to give to the defense. So even in spite of the U.S. prosecution not being able to give all the materials that they need to provide by a certain date, the hearing is still set to go forth on the 18th of May. In the interim, we've got another case management hearing, which will be on I believe it was the 24th of April. And that's just kind of that remand period where Julian, every 28 days, it has to be updated. So I think at that point, the judge said today, because the extradition courts are due to be back in about 2 weeks' time and to start kind of opening, and not for Julian, for all other court cases in the UK, for extraditions in the UK. So she said she's not kind of prepared to make a decision on what the global picture will look like in May. It could change day by day. So I think there is still a very high possibility that this might get delayed, and there's probably going to be a lot of delays anyway, just because the world seems a little bit chaotic at the moment. So that I think that this is bound to be a very long process, but at the moment we're set to start on the 18th.
So the part that's crazy to me is the UK shutting down the other courts. They're not, to my knowledge, not allowing most other jury trials. Sorry, I had an echo going on. And they're still having this court proceed, where the trial's still going to happen on the 18th, which, for better or worse, I guess, at this point, amid this global pandemic we have going on, where they've denied him bail. He cannot even, at this point, access his legal counsel at all, let alone before, for the last years, being able to access them without being surveilled and having attorney-client privilege. And then they offered him the minor ability over a video link that they said was secure, but probably wasn't, to talk with his attorneys. And at this point, he has no access to absolutely any of his legal representation. For the week that he was in court for the first part of the hearing, they wouldn't even allow him to take those court documents back from the day, where at the end of the day, they took them from him, removed him from the glass box, and put him back into cells just to be brought back to the glass box where he could barely see or hear the court trials. So this whole situation is just, I mean, the best way to sum it up is, as Steve says it, it's like we're living in a cartoon right now.
And I mean, it goes beyond that too. One of the revelations that came out of the hearing today was that the United States government and the CIA were interested in DNA testing a dirty diaper that came from the trash of Julian Assange's partner. Like this whole thing is just out of freaking hand. If we can pull up the article from the Independent and just kind of touch on the couple other noteworthy moments from the hearing today. Pardon. During the virtual hearing, the judge also rejected a bid to delay the hearing. That's what we just went over. Where'd that thing go? He told the court that he had not been able to see Mr. Assange in jail and could see no viable way his client could be present in court to hear a witness. On Mr. Assange's mental state, he told the judge there are difficulties of the pandemic with the defendant himself. You are aware he has well-documented problems of clinical depression. Mr. Assange's treatment was on hold during the lockdown. He had been unable to see his family. I'm going to read one more paragraph and we can talk about it. But in those circumstantial petition to force him to enter a full evidential hearing in May, we respectfully submit it would be unjust. We respectfully submit it would be oppressive. And of course, as we're all but too accustomed to hearing, Vanessa Barrester ruled against him. So we've got a man in Julian Assange who is in poor health physically, has a chronic lung condition. He's in poor health psychologically. He's been fucking tortured for the better part of 8 years. And we have a judge who, against all reasoning, against all moral standing, and against the freaking law, is acting as no more than a courier of directions from the U.S. State Department.
And with the evidentiary hearing coming up, this is when the witnesses are going to speak. And there's travel bans across the globe right now. So how is Noam Chomsky going to get there and be able to be safe? Because he's a man, I believe he's in his 90s at this point. How is Cassandra Fairbanks even going to be able to travel over there to present her case as a witness in his situation, or any of the other people that are coming to speak? And I'm pretty sure Cassandra's in there. She wasn't listed on the document, but in
yeah,
go ahead.
The judge said that they can go via video link.
Okay.
So that they could just kind of like Skype in, and that is sufficient. She said this is something that happens all the time, and that's what they would do if they were unable to travel.
Yeah, because that's like just the entire situation.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, the entire situation is just absolutely absurd. That it can go from literally Julian being put from a glass box, handcuffed multiple times, strip searched twice, put into multiple different holding cells, just to be returned to the glass box. And then after all of that happens, his bail gets denied amid a global pandemic, while the UK is actively releasing at least up to 4,000 prisoners right now that have done something that they said is illegal. And then in Julian's case, they said, well, he wasn't convicted of anything. How can we actually release him if there hasn't been any crime? And to me, that's like the entire paradox, is there is no crime for him to be prosecuted on to begin with, and then to be denied bail and then threatened to have his partner's name released and his children's name released, literally just for asking for humane treatment after almost a decade of torture at this point, is just like, it's just disgusting to see this entire thing unfold in real time.
No, I completely agree. I'm trying to see if there's anything left in the article that we need to cover, and there is not. So if we can move to the Wayback Machine and go over that one time that Julian Assange helped, the Australian police catch child pornographers, because it's really going to set up the next incredibly cartoonish story. And I think that this is something that maybe a lot of people don't know, but before there was a WikiLeaks and before there was, you know, where are we going on now? What, 4,000 days, 30, what was it, 3,400 days,
3,409.
3,409 days of arbitrary detention for Julian Assange. He did his local law enforcement a huge solid. This article dates back to February 12, 2011. It has been revealed in a Melbourne court that WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange once helped Victoria Police in 2 investigations into child pornography. He provided expert technical witness and support to assist in the prosecution of people suspected of involvement in pornography offenses on the internet. The Saturday Age can now report this after a judge revoked a suppression order she imposed last month, partly out of concerns for Assange's safety. Can you let that sink in for a moment? There was a judge that was concerned about Julian Assange's safety. I want us all to take a second to appreciate that. Let's see. His lawyer stated in 1993 that Assange helped provide assistance to police authorities, but would not elaborate. A week ago, when the Age appeared before Judge Morris to apply for the order to be lifted, Assange's Melbourne lawyer said he did not consent to or oppose its revocation. My client assisted in relation to 2 investigations. His role was limited to providing technical advice and support and to assist in the prosecution of persons suspected of publishing and distributing child pornography on the internet. This is one of those things that just underscores that throughout Julian Assange's entire life, he was trying to do the right thing and trying to get the right information to people who could then do something about it. And that's one of the fundamental cores of what WikiLeaks is. That's what a public disclosure outlet does. That's what journalists are supposed to do. And we're so far removed from 1993 when there was a sympathetic judge and there was a grateful police department. It's just fucking mind-boggling.
And it speaks volumes to his character too. No, I'm here. I was just going to say it speaks volumes to his character too, as someone who probably didn't even have to get involved in this, as someone who could have just kept on doing other things in that time, because Julian Assange has always been fighting for truthful information to get out. So for him to take the time truly just shows his humanity as someone who's willing to fight for people, even fight for the most vulnerable people, fight for children that were being sexually exploited and distributed for other people's enjoyment, as horrible as it is to word that way. And the fact that he stood up for that, and that's not something that's put front and center, where you just see these smears trying to turn it into, oh, he was a predator, he raped someone, and all of these other just bullshit charges that people bring up, and smears that exist simply to try to drag this man's name through the mud because they can't refute the information that he released. When in reality, he was stopping things like that from happening and putting the people that were exploiting people sexually, especially children sexually, providing his basic technical knowledge, not basic, but his technical knowledge to help incarcerate these people because they are predators upon society.
Exactly. I'm interested to know where these people are, today. But yeah, this is something that's often not talked about. And I believe around this time too, he was a young father at the same time and was taking care of his son full time. I believe he quit school so he could be there for him. So there's a long history there of just a really high moral character. Another thing that we wanted to bring up tonight is some news coming out of Australia. So the NSW Council for Civil Liberties.
We have one more first in relation to pedophilia in Australia, just to kind of show how it's transitioned from Julian fighting to put pedophiles into jail to what they're doing now. Josh is working on getting that article up for us, but I'll start exploring it here.
Okay, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, as we're getting that up on the screen.
Very recent,
yeah,
right?
this was released today, actually, April 7th, 2020. Yeah. Court quashes Cardinal's sex abuse conviction. The former Vatican treasurer, 78, was one of the most senior Catholic figures ever jailed for such crimes. In 2018, a jury found he abused 2 boys in Melbourne in the 1990s. Both the High Court of Australia quashed the verdict on Tuesday, bringing an immediate end to Cardinal Pell's 6-year jail sentence. The Australian cleric has maintained his innocence since he was charged by police in June 2017. His case rocked the Catholic Church, where he had been one of the Pope's most senior advisors. If a full bench of 7 judges had ruled unanimously in Cardinal Pell's favor, finding the jury had not properly considered all the evidence presented at the trial. It was the Cardinal's final legal challenge after his conviction was upheld by a lower court last year. I have consistently maintained my innocence while suffering from a serious injustice, Cardinal Pell said in a statement after his decision. He had served more than 400 days of his sentence and cannot be retired on the charges. That's disgusting.
They're
the simple
letting
fact
pedophile priests walk free. We're up to 4 inmates in Belmarsh now with COVID, is the report. There's been more than 100 people that work at Belmarsh that have self-quarantined. They're letting people, nonviolent offenders, out of jails and prisons all over the globe to, try and either make room for us or save their lives. And yet Julian Assange still incarcerated. And the fucking British government's reason for it is, oh, well, of course we can't let him out right now. We haven't even convicted him of anything. Are you kidding me? It's cartoonish. It's so backwards. It's so counterintuitive. It's fucking it's so ridiculous. It makes me very, very angry in my feelers.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree, because the government Australia actually had. Am I muted? Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yeah, so I believe that the government Australia actually has legal requirements to defend Julian Assange. That if there is an Australian that has their human rights violated, that their government must do something about it. And instead of fighting for Julian, instead of fighting to bring Julian home, instead of fighting to end the extradition of a multi-award-winning journalist, they're letting pedophiles out of prison. And they're saying, oh, no, the jury, they looked at all this evidence, but, a council of your peers, they were wrong. It's these judges that are in non-elected positions that actually know what's going on, so you're free to go, is just sickening to me. That they would even have the time of day in the middle of a pandemic to rule on a case of a serial pedophile, but yet there's no time for these high courts and these administration officials and the MPs in the country, short of a few of them, because there are some doing great work, to actually give a shit about one of the journalists from their country that exposed the war crimes that happened around the world, that exposed environmental crimes that happened around the world, and literally just ignore him while letting a sick man like that out of jail.
And it's the Australian press that is behind the effort to have the names of his partner and children released. It's his own freaking bloodthirsty tabloid-esque mainstream media that's leading the push for this. Sorry, you look like you're getting ready to say something, T. I apologize.
Yeah, no, I share your frustration. I know everybody right now is sharing this frustration. Guys, if you do have questions for us in the chat, do leave us your questions or your thoughts, of course, on this. I think we're ready to move on to the article I was talking about earlier. Again, this is coming out of Australia. I do believe that, oh, here it is. Okay, so again, this is the NSW, Council for Civil Liberties, and they are calling for intervention. Okay.
I can pull it up real quick.
Okay. And this is to Prime Minister Morrison. This is an intervention on behalf of Australian citizen Julian Assange. And this council is asking and calling upon the Australian government to intervene to protect the rights of their own citizen who is facing, obviously, an extradition to the United States with a very, very lengthy prison sentence if tried and convicted. There's been a lot of activists in Australia doing some great work who have really been at the forefront of this. Andrew's pulling this up for us so you guys can see it.
I'm trying to find it. I'm sorry. Okay, let me unshare my screen while I find this. You can keep talking, Taylor.
In this, in this document here, they just basically say that the treatment of Assange by the US and UK government since 2010 has been unjust, cruel, and clearly politically motivated. Now, do remember that Australia is required to intervene in this situation. They are required to help one of their own citizens if they are facing a persecution by a foreign country. That's a very broad way to put it. There's some more specifics to that, but they still haven't done so. But there have been MPs, of course, out of Australia who have shown support for Assange. Steve, what do you make of this this letter here?
Well, I mean, you hope it has some sort of effect. The Council of Europe came out with an updated and upgraded statement as well over the last week or so. We're seeing movement from Australia where there hasn't been in the past. So it's, you know, after the complete and utter shit show that was the case management hearing today, it's one of those things where you know it can build you back up a little bit, because it really is some bold language in it. I hope it has an effect. I really do.
And just to read through some of this, the NSW Council for Civil Liberties calls for the Australian government. Yeah, this is the NSW one. That's not what it's showing on my screen. Is the right one up now?
Yeah.
Sorry, it looked right on my screen. I apologize about that. The NSW Council for Civil Liberties calls upon the Australian government to intervene to protect the rights of Julian Assange, who is facing increasingly likely prospects of his extradition to the United States, to face 17 offenses under the Espionage Act of 1917 and one conspiracy to commit computer intrusion charge. Almost certain incarceration in a high-security prison for the rest of his life. Assange's current position is desperate and dangerous. His mental and physical health have been seriously compromised. He is imprisoned in a high-security prison, high-security London gaol, with limited capacity to communicate with his legal team. His extradition proceedings in London have given the appearance of biased and almost certain predetermined outcome. It appears that he has been and will continue to be unfairly treated within the UK courts. If he's extradited to the US, he will face charges which will communicatively expose him to 175 years of imprisonment. The treatment of Assange by the US and UK government since 2010 has been unjust, cruel, and clearly politically motivated. The NSWCCL's view on these actions for which Assange has been charged and for which he has been pursued are not crimes that comply with the rule of law. The publication of WikiLeaks files constitutes the public interest whistleblowing from Chelsea Manning and public interest journalism and publishing from Julian Assange in the mainstream newspapers which publish much of the material. In doing so, they strengthen the public's right to know what the governments are doing in their name. Such actions strengthen rather than undermine democratic states. And it continues on for 3 more pages, and I won't read through all of it, but I will drop the link here into the show chat because I have it actually listed in one of my Google Drives for everybody to take a look at, because it goes further and further down to proposed actions. And I want to read this part real quick. The NSW Council for Civil Liberties calls on the Australian government to enhance and immediately begin political and diplomatic overtures to the UK government to stop the politically motivated procedure to extradite Julian Assange to the US and facilitate his return to Australia. With regards to the current extradition case being heard in Woolwich Crown Court, the Australian government should use its diplomatic and political access to urge the UK government to ensure that Julian Assange has adequate, private, and confidential access to his legal team, and that his treatment within the court is fair and reasonable and allows for him to clearly see and hear the proceedings and communicate as appropriate with his legal team. We note concerns have been expressed that in the event Assange's return to Australia as a result of either the court or the UK government not allowing his extradition, the Australian government may have to intervene of themselves, facilitating his extradition to the US. Should that be the case, the NSW Council on Civil Liberties urges the government to publicly reject such an option.
Yeah, I mean, I hope that this starts to become a trend among, every province in Australia and among other world governments, among the parliaments and state houses. I'm a little bit surprised to see that statement issued out of a Five Eyes country. I am, and I hope there's more. I do. Okay, so
we also want to remind you guys, of course. We want to remind you guys, of course, April 11th is approaching, and of course, this day is significant because it marks the 1-year date since Assange was arrested and dragged outside of Ecuador's London embassy and arrested. So on that day, the DEA campaign, Don't Extradite Assange campaign, is hosting an event, and it's a free, or wait a second. It's Courage Foundation event. Courage Foundation is hosting an event, and you can't see it. And
Daniel Ellsberg, Chris Hedges.
Do we have people that up?
Marjorie Cohn and Aaron Mate are going to be speaking.
I'll actually be speaking as well. I got in contact with Ian Rose, and he invited me to come and speak to that. So we will actually be live streaming it here too, on our channel, because it is a limited number of guests that can attend because it is inside of a Zoom conference. So if you're interested in watching, but not necessarily interested in getting into the conference, into the call itself, you will still have the ability to participate because we'll still be streaming it at that time. And I think that this upcoming date is the perfect time for decentralized activism. It's the time for people to stand up, to use the time that they can spend outside of their houses, to do what they can with the time, money, and resources that they have. We have 4 days, counting today, until this event happens. And I just really hope that everyone watching and the people that watch later will really take it upon themselves to understand how important this moment in history is to actually act, to actually stand up and be the one voice that's willing to educate your community. One great option right now for people, if you don't want to go door to door flyers, if you don't feel comfortable putting up posters, put signs on your car. Use painter's tape, which isn't going to mess the car up at all. Make a banner that just says "Free Julian Assange," and drive through neighborhoods honking, because everyone's home. Everyone will walk out, and you may have some people that are willing to talk with you from a distance about what is going on. Be safe. Don't allow yourself to become exposed or expose anyone else. Maintain the physical distancing parameters. And whatever laws are in your country, I'm not asking people to violate anything, but people can still associate, and can still protest. It just has to be one person for most places around the world at this point. So I really hope that we can move to make this 365th day since the trafficking of Julian Assange from the Ecuadorian prison, or from the Ecuadorian embassy to Belmarsh prison, a way to educate the public, because there's so many people that are aware of this situation but don't know exactly what's going on because of the media blackouts and because of the smears, that this is the opportunity for you to get out into your neighborhood and in some way remind people who this man is, what he fought for, but most importantly, what he revealed. Because it's crimes against humanity. It's little kids being shot while in a van with their dad from over a mile away, and then refused treatment at an American prison and sent to local hospitals where they then wash their hands of it. And it's something that Steve covered, which was the collateral murder video, because the 10-year anniversary of that was Sunday, I believe, our time. And just do what you can with the time and money that you have, because at no point has the idea of decentralized activism and being the one person to stand up been more important and more pressing, and the only way that it can actually be done in this current climate of the repression of association.
Oh, real quick, it was Saturday. That was Chelsea Manning Day is what I'm trying to make happen now. I want every April 5th to be Chelsea Manning Day, and we celebrate by sharing information that exposes war crimes and abuses of power, and we maybe surround the halls of power as well. And dancing. I believe there should be dancing. I do. I didn't know you were gonna speak for that thing. That's really cool. Congratulations. I did want to make sure that we marked the 10th anniversary of collateral murder while we had the vigil today, because it's just man, oh no, you're right. Shit, it was Sunday. I can't even add anymore. It's all running. It is my poor show today, and like the company. At any rate, yes, it was Sunday. I'm an idiot. I did want to make sure that we marked it. I did about a 15 or 20 minute show, but it's one of those moments that really just it blew so many people away, and to have us advance now 10 years to where if you ask someone on the street, have you seen collateral murder? Do you know what collateral murder is? I don't know if you would get a yes right away.
And I would like
agree
to.
with you on that. I don't think people are too aware of this. It's quite amazing, but I do think that, and Kristen Hrafnson made this point during the live stream that was held in honor of the 10 years of collateral murder, and he said that at least for people who are aware of this, it really becomes sort of a a representation of the Iraq war, and then it really did change people's perspectives on what was taking place at that time. And he actually went over there to investigate prior to that video from being published. And I encourage everybody watching to check out that stream. Dr. Nozomi Heisei also was on that stream. It was a really interesting and informative discussion, and they really get into the specifics of collateral murder.
And I believe in our show notes, if you check it out, is actually, and I'm pulling it up just to double check, because we played a clip here on the A4A channel. The documentary that it came from was John Pilger's War You Don't See. And the last 15 minutes of that are dedicated solely to the exploration of collateral murder from Julian's own experience in reporting it. And Julian goes as far as to describe how the word nice became a cuss word, because how can a street full of bodies be nice? And you can see the emotion that just that one line from that video showed in his face, and then just the way that he held himself in trying to describe how that simple word nice came to represent something so dark and so vile. And for the people that haven't seen it, there's a point about halfway through where the gunners in this airplane, one of them says, "Look at all those dead bastards." And then there's a brief moment of pause while referring to the 8 to 11 bodies that lay blown to pieces on the ground. And one of them simply replies, "Nice." And just the power and the just, I don't even know what proper word to describe it, but just the inhumanity of that situation. And that's just one instance of a war that's been going on for 17 years. And that's just
and if
one.
you listen to, sorry to cut you off here, but if you listen to Mike Preisner's speech that he gave in DC, and fatigues on a very snowy day, he talks about this, and he says we were conditioned, we were broken down, and we were conditioned to dehumanize these people as much as possible. And they weren't individuals, they were just a collective enemy, and that's how we were programmed to view them. And what you've got there with the audio footage from the people in the helicopter is complete disassociation, like 100% disassociation. And at some point that's going to have to come back to you, and you're going to have a reckoning. There was I think Ethan Gould is his name, I'm not entirely sure I'm getting that right, but he was the soldier in that clip who went on to talk about it after the fact. And it will never stop bothering me until it's set right that the only two people to spend any time behind bars over the releasing of that particular footage of a war crime is Chelsea Manning and Julian
Assange. It's easy to watch the video and say, "Fuck those soldiers, like they're pieces of shit," which is easy to say because that's not inherently incorrect. But the larger apparatus behind them that wrote the rules of engagement, because they performed what was called a double tap. And what that means is you hit an initial target. So someone that you think is a terrorist, or in this case, a journalist with a camera. And then you wait a little bit and you circle around, and then you kill the first responders too. That's a war crime. That's terrorism, to put it lightly. And it's absolutely disgusting, because the fact that there was a 9-year-old girl and a 6-year-old boy in that van that they hit, that they laughed and said, "Ha, we got right through the windshield." It just shows that the people in this apparatus, the individual soldiers, like Steve was saying, are so conditioned that they can think of these gross violations of international law. And if the equivalent happened here in the US where someone got shot, an ambulance pulled up and someone shot the ambulance driver, our hair as a country would be on fire. The news would cover it every single day. But when it happens in a foreign country to brown people that we want to kill for oil and opium, it's okay. It's commonplace. It's the way that we bring democracy to the world. And then, 17 years later, when we have brought democracy to that country and that country asks us to leave through a parliamentary vote, we still don't. And a little backstory on that. This was right around the time, I believe it was right after the Iranian general was killed, that the Iraqi parliament held a vote and said, no, the U.S. can leave. And the U.S. said, we're not leaving. So the level of bringing democracy, apparently, for the last 17 years didn't work, to the point that we've now had to re-engage in Iraq, while for the last two presidents, the last two administrations ran on ending these wars and ending this literal money pit that's designed to make people trillions of dollars, where the losses are in blood, is just absolutely insane that this can still be going on 17 years later, and that there are strong groups pushing back against it, but that the public is left at this point largely unaware of what's going on in these countries.
That's an excellent point, Andrew, and I think that this is going to be a good place to wrap for the night. About 10 minutes ago, we got a DM from Solitary Reaper, who's been a wonderful supporter of the show. We're going to put that together for Thursday because we're on a new streaming schedule now. With Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. We'll be going live at 9 p.m. Eastern Tuesday and Thursday, and 1 p.m. Eastern on Saturday. So way more content during lockdown. You want to go ahead and throw some final thoughts here, y'all?
Yeah, for sure. I want to thank everybody for tuning in and watching. I hope everybody is staying well and is okay and taking care of themselves. Again, thank you guys for watching and joining us. We will be back on again this Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 6 p.m. Pacific Time. And you could follow me on Twitter at _Taylor Hudak, and on Instagram at journalist_Taylor. And I also want to thank Josh for helping us out, and as always, and Kimber as well for helping us out and with graphics and everything. So a big thank you to them, and a big thanks to everybody watching.
Yeah, you can find us on Twitter at action_4 Assange. You can find me personally at Andrew Zigman. And I hope that everyone will look up the event that's happening on the 11th and pre-register and be there live in the Zoom chat as it's happening. But I also want to give a very special thank you to Billy and Brittany Winter for coming on, because they haven't seen their family member, their daughter, and their sister in over 1,000 days at this point. And the fear of coronavirus is just ravaging prisons right now. Like, I got a letter at my work today, an email that basically said that the National Guard is stepping into federal prisons to help with aid, because one of the prisons here in Ohio has suffered 6 fatalities. One prison has 6 fatalities from coronavirus. And so it's everyone at this point that's at risk, and not just from this virus, but of the government response, because we're seeing a rollout of authoritarianism, of drones being deployed, of the military being deployed, far before we see any actual relief effort. And that's a sign that this entire pandemic is designed in a way to strip civil liberties and take people's abilities away from them to associate and to protest and to speak freely against a government that is absolutely out of control and ran by the most tyrannical people you can possibly imagine. So again, thank you to everybody watching.
My name's Steve Poikinen, and I host a show called Slow News Day. I am now streaming on multiple platforms. You can find me here on YouTube by typing in Slow News Day Podcast. I'm also just now on D Live, looking forward to exploring that more. I have been putting out a ridiculous amount of content during lockdown. Tomorrow, I will be interviewing David McBride, the Australian whistleblower who was on this show a couple of weeks ago. I've got a couple of Patreon streams coming up. Thursday morning for me, 1 o'clock in the afternoon East Coast, I will be sitting down with Whitney Webb again. She has an amazing article up on The Last American Vagabond. It's called All Roads Lead to Dark Matter, and it is about the series of simulated events that just so coincidentally were all ran by the same globalist billionaires and unelected bureaucrats, and all end with a post-pandemic police state. So that will be a fascinating conversation. They always are with her. I thank my co-hosts and Sleepy Josh and the Mean Panda. And big thanks to Billy Winter Davis and Brittany Davis. We will see you Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. We love you guys. Good luck to us all.